Hello there. Welcome back to the Schools of Excellence podcast. Today we're going to be talking about hiring, but not hiring in the context that you're used to. This is not a tips and tricks hiring. This is kind of a real reality moment of the hiring moment that no one really prepares leaders for. So many of you, especially if you're listening to this episode, it means that you've hired at some point in your career. And I know that you have definitely checked references and trusted your gut and believed in someone, and then they disappointed you. They struggled in ways that you didn't expect, or they couldn't hold the role in the way that you anticipated or the way that you had hoped, or they leave suddenly. And the messaging comes really, really fast when this happens, which is, the wrong hire is expensive. You should have vetted better. This is what happens when you trust too quickly. Hiring is everything. And what happens is with this messaging is leaders internalize this as, if something went wrong with the hire, it's my fault. And no one says this outright, but leadership messaging teaches leaders to be good and foresee and anticipate everything. So if you don't, it means something's wrong with you, or you're not as discerning. And there's a really, I would say, almost toxic hiring myth that leaders are swimming in. And this is in school leadership a lot, but it's in leadership in general in business, where there's a messaging around, if you hire the right person, the problems stop. The issues stop. You can finally rest. You can finally delegate. And the myth teaches leaders that responsibility equals foresight. That if you trust this person that you hired, it equals protection, right? Because then you won't get hurt. Then there won't be any issues. It teaches leaders that if you hire well, it will remove all the risk. Or if the new hire made mistakes, it equals poor judgment on your part. All of that is not true. Because all that does is it creates hyper responsibility dressed up as leadership advice. And hyper responsibility is what breaks leaders. It's why I wrote my book, This Can't Be Normal, because leaders are crushing already under invisible weight of hyper responsibility and overfunctioning. And so for leaders who already carry so much and the emotional weight of an organization, this myth becomes unbearable, because what happens is hiring no longer becomes a decision, and then multiple decisions that come after, it becomes a moral and ethical test of your intelligence. So what is a different lens that we could start looking at when we think of hiring? Okay. Hiring is not the moment you eliminate humanity. Okay. Hiring is the moment that you agreed to lead humanity. Okay. Because you're not hiring an AI agent. You're not hiring a robot. You're not hiring for certainty. You're not hiring immunity from disruption. You don't get to choose those things. You're hiring a human being with a soul who is beautifully humanly flawed. So if you're hiring a human, that means humanity will show up. So when leaders hear this, they're like, okay, so what does that mean? Okay. When you're trusting someone that you hire, here's what hiring someone actually means, okay? You are trusting their intentions, their values, their willingness to grow, their capacity to repair, their ability to return after mistakes. You are not trusting a new hire's flawless execution, because they will not be flawless. You are not trusting their endless consistency, because they will not. You cannot trust their immunity to stress. You have no idea what kind of immunity they have to stress. You are not hiring perfect alignment, because that doesn't exist in humanity. And when we confuse and convolute these things, we betray reality. And when we betray reality, we start to blame and shame ourselves internally. So I often share an analogy to marriage when it comes to hiring, because I think it's a really good way to look at some of the missteps that we make within hiring. There's a message that we hear a lot, which is who you marry is the most important decision you're going to make. And that's true, partly. Because values, connection, attraction, shared direction All of these things matter, okay? But anyone who's actually been married for at least 5 years also knows that marriage is not one decision. Marriage is a lifetime of decisions with the same person. And so you can marry someone knowing, I want to build something with you. But after that initial marriage, right, the decision, the wedding day, now the building begins. And so in the building of this life together, there are seasons of joy that you could have never predicted. There are inside jokes that did not exist before you met this person. There are rituals that form quietly. There are shared glances across a crowded room. There's a way that you learn how to repair faster than before. And there's growth that only happens because you two are together. There are versions of yourself that emerge because someone else keeps seeing and witnessing you, even when you're tired, imperfect, or unsure. Marriage is so beautiful not because it is seamless. It is beautiful because it deepens you. And that deepening doesn't come because you chose perfectly. It comes from learning how to be in the relationship as life unfolds itself. And so what I find so interesting when it comes to hiring is how obsessed our industry is with hiring the quote unquote right people. We talk about it obsessively. Hire for values, hire slow, get the right people on the bus. I mean, you've heard these platitudes in endless nauseam at every conference that you've been to. And values and character and alignment matter deeply. They do. But when hiring becomes your primary strategy, you miss something essential. Because hiring, just like marriage, is only the beginning of the relationship. You don't hire someone because you know exactly how they're going to show up in every future season. It's not possible to know how they're going to show up in every future season. You don't hire someone knowing exactly how they're going to respond when the pressure increases. It's not possible to know. You don't hire someone, like, when you hire them, the role stretches them. Confidence will ebb and flow. Life outside of work will enter the room. What are you going to do then? So just like in marriage, there are seasons of unexpected brilliance. People rise. People surprise themselves. People grow into capacities they didn't know was even possible because they were trusted, they were coached, and they were witnessed. And just like in marriage, there are seasons of uncertainty. There are moments where someone needs more structure, more clarity, more support. There are moments when roles need to be renegotiated, expectations need to be re-anchored, and rhythms need to be reestablished. These are not failures of hiring, that you didn't hire the right person. They're the natural unfolding of a relationship. And just like in a marriage, if one spouse believes that nothing should ever change, right? I married you like this and you should never change. So even though you have 5 kids now and your capacity has diminished, what do you mean? I still need X, Y, and Z. No, that's a selfish baby. That is someone who never grew up and never understood that people change. Their capacity changes, their depth changes, their values change, their seasons change, their priorities shift, what they find important because they're evolving. And so looking at your partner and thinking like, I don't understand, like, how come I'm still not getting X, Y, and Z? Well, your partner changed. Let's renegotiate the roles. Let's refigure out how we continue to build this beautiful life together. It's not one party gets to never change and the other person has to constantly adapt to the relationship. That's dysfunctional. That's not a partnership. And in the same thing in hiring, when you're bringing someone in, you understand you're both going to evolve. You know, I often hear things where people are like, I heard a very famous speaker talking at a conference and she's like, I really don't like it when people say like, oh, you've changed, you grew, you adapted. She's like, I haven't changed. I'm the same person I was 20 years ago. And I'm like, why are you parading that as if that's something that's like, like applaudable? It's not. And the bottom line is you did change. You're 47. How could you possibly think that you have the same brain that you did when you were 23? I hope you don't have the same brain. I really hope that you think differently than you did when you were 23. I hope that you have different values. I hope that you look at life differently. I hope that your marriage and intimacy and connection and relationship with your spouse has evolved. I believe that it has. You have grown children. You're a grandparent. How can you possibly think that you are the same person? But people are terrified of signaling that they've changed, or there's growth, or there is evolution of the relationship. And I don't judge this person. What I'm signaling here and what I want to share is people are going to change, and your hires are going to change because they are people. You didn't hire a robot. And this is where leaders get stuck, because they're taught to believe that trust is something you either have or you don't have. Either you trust this person or you don't trust this person. Trust is not a personality trait. It is not a gut instinct, and it is not a one-time decision. Trust is sustained through rhythm. The problem was never that you trusted. The problem is that you were taught that you trust once, instead of trusting inside of a container that holds humanity as life unfolds itself. And so I want to share with you a couple of rhythms that matter after you hire. And these are not tips and tricks. These are stabilizing relational rhythms that create predictable safety. So this is what I talk about inside of my book, This Can't Be Normal, because nobody needs more tips and tricks or advice. We need steady anchors and rhythms that we could return to, that remind us of our humanity, that remind us, where do we go to when life gets crazy, loud, unpredictable, unsafe, disruptive forces, changes in government policy, all the things that are constant, the economy, everything that's constantly shifting. I write about that in chapter 4 of my book, The 3 Destructive Forces of Leadership. But what I'm sharing here is just a little glimpse of I go in deeper inside of my book, This Can't Be Normal, of under the relational intelligence chapter, specific rhythms that cultivate relational intelligence, which is a key anchor when you're doing hiring. And if you work inside of leadership, you're going to need to hire people, right? So the leadership skill that I believe is not trained for is the hardest part of hiring is not choosing the person. The highest part of hiring is holding the relationship when humanity shows up. So when people say like, oh, she's really good at hiring, is she really good at selecting people? But what happens when the people are in? Is that person also the person who leads the relationship when humanity shows up? Because that's a totally different type of hiring. So most leaders are trained in interviewing, onboarding, performance metrics, systems, and SOPs, and all of those matter. They're all really important. But what keeps the relationship is being trained in how to do repair, how to deal with disappointment, how to recalibrate after stress, how to stay grounded when trust is strained. And this is where leadership collapses. This is why I wrote the book again, This Can't Be Normal, because we think we hired wrong. And you didn't hire wrong. You were never taught how to hold the part of leadership when humanity shows up. And I take this a step deeper, where I talk about something called the interview fallacy, because there's this other place where this hiring myth shows up. Our industry, again, is obsessed with the right interview questions and the perfect onboarding. I mean, you can literally go to any conference right now in the education sector and go to the breakout sessions or main stage speakers, and you will find at least 1 or 2 breakouts in relation to hiring and onboarding. Why? Because it is such a need to know how to do this. But all of those breakout sessions, and again, this isn't judgment on those breakout sessions. The breakout sessions are doing what the conference organizers want, which is give the people what they're asking for, which is, how do I interview? How do I onboard? How do I create metrics? How do I create systems? How do I create SOPs? But what people actually need is they need to understand the rhythms that they need to do after the hire happens. So the myth that we believe is people tell themselves like, I just need to ask better questions. Or if I slow down the interview process, or if I design a tighter onboarding, like we're going to move our onboarding into Trello, and then, oh my God, it's going to be amazing. We're never going to have an onboarding issue again. Yes, you are. You're not going to be safe if you have better interview questions or if you have a better onboarding. That's not what's going to create safety. Because if it is, you would have already had safety. The part that no one says out loud is you cannot interview for humanity. You cannot interview for humanity. You cannot ask someone in an interview. So, what happens if your dad dies while you work here? How do you think you're going to respond to that? Okay. And if your eyebrows just raised, or if you just like slammed the brakes because you're driving and you're like, what the hell, Chanie? Who would ever ask a question like that? You're right. You cannot ask a question like that. But guess what? Do you know what happens after you hire people? Sometimes people lose their parents. Sometimes people's parents get sick. Sometimes people's kids get sick. Sometimes people's kids die while they work for you, or their spouse dies. You can't interview for that shit. You can't ask someone in an interview. So, if your husband gets sick with cancer and goes through chemo and ends up dying while he works here, like, how do you think you're going to respond? Do you think you're going to end up staying? Do you think you're going to be able to like navigate the grief? Do you think I'm going to have to like readjust your performance metrics? Like, what am I going to need to do if that happens to you? Do you think you're going to drift? Do you think I'm going to readjust expectation? Do you think you're going to have postpartum depression after you have a baby? Are you going to have a baby if you work here? Are you done having babies? You can't ask those questions. You don't ask questions like that. It's obscene. And yet, there's a part of us that secretly hopes that we never have to ask those questions. We're like, well, nothing's going to ever change, right? Like, they're so resilient. They're so amazing. Like, I interviewed them and they showed such resilience. Like, of course, if anything happens, like, they're going to bounce back. Really? What if something happens to them that has never happened to them before? And they actually have absolutely no idea how to bounce back from this. And they don't know how to be resilient to that. What are you going to do then? You blame yourself that you made the wrong hire. You cannot design onboarding that accounts for someone who suddenly starts needing to visit their mom during chemo 3 months into working for you, right? So you hire someone, they're doing amazing. And then 90 days in, you're like, okay, now we're going to start upping their hours. And then they're like, by the way, my mom, they found a tumor and she's starting chemotherapy. So starting tomorrow, I'm not going to be able to do the morning shift. Good luck with that. Had your good onboarding on Trello, help you deal with that one? How did your good interview questions help you navigate that one? It didn't. It cannot save you from that because you cannot predict life. Lifes. And we have to be able to navigate it. But what ends up happening is leaders just do spiritualized warfare. And they're like, I'm amazing at rolling with the punches. It's okay. We just adapted. We just shifted. What ends up happening? That means you keep absorbing impact. Every time something shifts, zhoop, you're right back into the day-to-day. Zhoop, everyone's back into crisis mode. Zhoop, everyone's back into doing what they said they wouldn't do because a crisis hit. Guys, there's always going to be some form of a crisis. There's always going to be some sort of a disruptive force. That's what I write about in chapter 4 of my book. Stop trying to outrun the forces through shiny objects, tools, SOPs, processes, and software. We need rhythms of trust and connection. You cannot screen how someone's nervous system will react under sustained pressure. You cannot screen how someone will grieve and how grief will impact their focus. You cannot screen for what will happen when this person becomes a parent for the first time. You cannot screen for what will happen when this person has a burnout and burnout starts to, completely fog their cognitive ability to think. You cannot screen what life will ask of this person tomorrow. Life doesn't follow your onboarding timeline, my dears. It doesn't. What interview questions are actually good for, interviews are very valuable. I do interviews all the time. Interviews help you assess values, communication style, baseline skills, alignment with the mission, willingness to learn. Interviews were never meant to do what we're asking them to do. Interviews cannot predict resilience under loss. Interviews cannot forecast emotional capacity under stress. Interviews cannot guarantee consistency across all seasons. Interviews cannot eliminate the need for leadership later on. When leaders expect interviews to do that work, they're not being discerning. They're trying to choose their way out of relational responsibility because relational responsibility is hard. It is difficult. It requires consistent presence and attunement, and you cannot delegate it to a system. Onboarding is the beginning. It is not a shield. Onboarding matters, but onboarding is not a force shield. Okay? Onboarding cannot protect you from a sudden diagnosis, a marriage in crisis, a child struggling, grief that arrives quietly, a season where confidence collapses. When leaders believe that onboarding should prevent disruption, they end up feeling betrayed by normal human life. And that betrayal hardens them and makes them not want to trust people and makes them not want to enter the arena and turns them eventually into people who are like, I just need to get out of this industry. I just need to sell. I just can't do this anymore. I'm out. and then just pass down the dysfunction and exhaustion to the next generation of leaders. And like, it's your turn to manage this chaos. We do not interview to eliminate humanity. We interview to begin a relationship with our eyes open. You do not date someone to eliminate humanity, right? Like, okay, I'm going to date them. And after I date them, we're going to live together. And after we live together, and you keep doing all these things of like, okay, let me like set up all these things so I could see like, what are they going to be like when you get married? You can get signals. You are never going to know what this person is actually going to be like until you actually get married. Okay, living with them and being engaged is still not being married. It's not. So you can't know what this person's going to be like until you're actually married. You can't play marriage and like, oh, if they're acting like this, that's probably how they're going to act when they're married. Yes, there are definite signals of that, of like, okay, if they act like a jerk on a date, yeah, they're probably going to act like a jerk later on. Absolutely. That's not what I'm saying. I'm explaining that you can't constantly dress rehearse what something's going to be like and then think, okay, I dress rehearsed it enough. Now I'm ready for the real thing. When the real thing comes up, guess what happens? Life shows up. Even when actors spend years practicing a specific set, when the lights and camera finally show up, guess what happens? Stuff still happens. Actors forget their lines. What are they going to do then? What are you going to do? Athletes prepare for 4 years for the Olympics. They train, muscle memory, mental, emotional, all the things, right? And it's an incredible feat to witness. And then when the bright lights come on, when they're on the top of the ski slopes, when they're in the arena, when they're in that pool, something happens. Always. What are they going to do when they're in that moment, right? What are they going to do? So their training and their rhythms show up for them in those moments, right? I'll never forget the story that I read with Michael Phelps, who when he won a gold medal, he won a lot, but one of the gold medals that he won when he dove into the water. I think within 2 seconds of diving in, his goggles malfunctioned and water flooded his goggles. And so he literally could not see. That's it. He was swimming blind. Okay. He still won. Why? His training kicked in. He knew exactly where the wall is. He knew exactly how many strokes it took to get to the wall. He didn't see the wall, but he couldn't bump into the wall. And he didn't bump into the wall. He got to the wall, turned around, and continued going. And won. Right? That is his training kicking in. It wasn't, oh my God, I'm training and training and training. So therefore, when I get into the water, nothing's going to ever go wrong. Oh, something did go wrong. Water flooded his goggles. Right? So when we hire and we interview and we onboard, we have to understand you are not protecting yourself from disruption. You're preparing yourself and recognizing that disruption is going to show up. How do you return? What do you do when disruption shows up? Right? Michael, what did he do when disruption shows up? Water came into his goggles. He's blind. Boom. He leaned on his practice. He knew exactly how many strokes to get him to the wall. You need trust rhythms and relational connection rhythms for what happens when life shows up. Okay? Because again, like I'm saying, hiring doesn't fail in the interviews. It fails when leaders believe that interview and onboarding are supposed to protect them from what rhythms are actually supposed to do. Okay. So one of the rhythms that I like to do is called an alignment rhythm. And I do this with my leaders, every other week. We do an alignment rhythm. So most leaders hire on board and then silently cross your fingers. I hope it works. Okay. And then when it doesn't, it feels personal. It feels shocking. It feels like betrayal of like, I hired them. I onboarded them. I trained them. No. Expectations are assumed and they're taught on the first day, but that is not how people actually learn, okay? A steady leader installs expectation, alignment rhythms consistently, usually within the first 30 to 60 days, right? They're doing conversations, not once, not vaguely, on rhythm. And in these alignment rhythms, it's, okay, what does good actually look like in your role? You're 30 days in. Let's talk about what good actually looks like. What is success starting to look like week to week, right? You're getting into a rhythm of working. Where are you feeling success? Where are you feeling momentum? Where are you still feeling stuck, right? What does support look like? Not vaguely what does support look like, because usually they'll just ask you for help with the thing that they're most struggling with. What does support look like? Your expectation right now at day 60 is to meet these expectations. What I'm noticing is these are some of the areas you're struggling in. Where would you like support in this area? Because this is an expectation, right? Usually when directors, leaders ask for like, what does support look like? They're like, I need more hands. I need you to hire someone else. I need more time. I need to get paid more. My dear, we all want more hands in the classroom. We all want to get paid more, and we all wish we had more time. Welcome to life. Okay. That's not support. Give me something tangible, right? You need to make sure that the transition rhythm happens every single day at 11 o'clock. So your kids are outside in the playground by 11 o'clock, because your playground time is from 11 to 11:30. So you cannot come outside at 11:15, because the children then only get 10 minutes of outdoor time. And in our school, the standard is all ages get 30 minutes of outdoor time every single day, non-negotiable. So you need support on how to get on time, outside, every single day by 11 o'clock. So where are you getting stuck in the transition, right? You're going from the circle to get outside, and it's seemingly taking you a lot longer than I think it should take. So where are you getting stuck? Would you like me to come observe the transition rhythm and see where I could possibly help you create some better systems so that the children can move a little bit more efficiently and you could get outside by 11 instead of 11:15? That is a great alignment conversation. That is a leader saying, I'm not lowering the standard. The standard is everyone needs to be outside for 30 minutes a day. I see that you're struggling in this specific area. Where do you think you need support, right? Activate the person's brain. Guess what? They have one. God gave every single person a brain. Every human being has a brain, right? AI robots, not a brain, right? It's artificial intelligence. The person in front of you who has a beating heartbeat, who has a soul, has a brain, a God-given brain, a brain that you do not have. So ask them to activate it. Ask them to activate their brain. Okay? That's where you talk about accountability. What misalignment looks like early, right at the 30-day mark. Like, we're a little misaligned here. You're coming 5 minutes late every single day. Do you realize that? I remember I had this conversation with a team member years ago when I was a director, and we had a 5-minute grace window, right? So because I worked in Manhattan, and so, the subway sometimes is a little unpredictable. And so we created a 5-minute grace window. So they had to be at work at 8:30. And if they came between 8:30 and 8:35, they weren't marked late. And so I had someone that came every single day at 8:35. And I knew that if in the first 30 days, she's already coming at 8:35, that means by month 6, she's coming at 8:45. So on the 30-day mark, when I did the alignment rhythm, I sat with her and I said, do you recognize that every single day you come 5 minutes late? She's like, but there's a 5-minute grace window. I'm like, yes. But every single day you use the 5-minute grace window. The grace window isn't there for you to use every single day. The grace window is there so that when every once in a while there's some train traffic or there's a little bit of that disruption, you have the grace window. So right now, you're using the grace window every day, which probably means you need to get in an earlier subway. You need to take the earlier train. Even if it's a 2-minute earlier train or a 3-minute earlier train, you need to get on an earlier train. So she did, and she started coming to work at 8:30, 8:25, so like between 8:25 and 8:30. And so what happened is I realized quickly where that was signaling towards. Now, this is the beautiful part of an alignment rhythm, is about, I would say 7 months into her working there, all of a sudden she started drifting again, and she started coming at 8:35. And I looked at the pattern, and 2 weeks went by, and every single day for 2 weeks, she was using the grace window again. So I brought her back in for an alignment conversation, and I said, hey, I want to bring this to your attention. Have drifted a little bit. You're back to using the grace window every single day. This is the pattern over the last 2 weeks. Let's go back. And she's like, yeah, it's been really difficult. I started taking the later train. Thanks so much for the reminder. I'm going to start taking the earlier train again. Okay. That's what an alignment rhythm does. It helps you track things earlier. There's nothing wrong with this hire. She was a phenomenal teacher. I loved having her. And also, she was perfectly capable of coming on time when I was able to have a really great conversation with her, right? Now, this is not the only conversation I had with her. I also did gratitude rhythms with her, one-on-one conversations with her, right? So let's talk about the one-on-ones, right? The one-on-one conversations is another rhythm that I talk about in the Integrity of Standards chapter. A lot of leaders only have conversations when something's wrong. But by then, you're activated, the staff member's defensive, the nervous system is all activated and allowed, and the conversation becomes 98% emotion and 2% clarity. And so the predictable rhythm of the one-on-ones, whether that's once a month or bi-weekly or whatever it is, it's where you consistently come to ask grounded questions. What's working right now? What feels heavy? Where are you stretching yourself? Where are you stuck? Where do you need clarity? Right? You're not rescuing. You're not doing therapy. You're not managing their emotions. You're not reducing surprises, right? You're not doing any management, any emotional labor. Humanity does not derail leadership. Okay. You consistently having these conversations doesn't derail you. When you're caught off guard because you didn't have these conversations for several months, that's what destabilizes leaders, right? When you have a rhythm like this, it actually turns disappointment into data because it keeps trust from becoming fragile, which is so powerful. And the third rhythm, and I know this podcast is getting a little bit longer, but this is an important conversation, is the rupture and repair rhythm, right? This is a rhythm that is so difficult, and it's probably the one that I do the most training and conversations on in our Leadership HQ and our membership, where we coach school leaders, owners, directors, their entire leadership teams on repair, consequences and repair, because this is really hard. So again, like I said, leadership trains on interviews, onboarding metrics, and systems. The lived reality is something's always going to go sideways. A misstep, a missed expectation, a moment of defensiveness, a communication breakdown, a trust wobble, right? All of these things are going to happen. That's part of leadership. And so when you don't have a repair rhythm, leadership becomes over-explaining, rescuing, clamping down harder, becoming even more over-controlling, or silently withdrawing, or performing, I'm just giving professional distance. I'm adopting the sink or swim approach. I'm stepping away because I need to see how strong they are. And I trust them. I trust that they can handle this. Please. The rupture and repair rhythm is an agreed upon way of returning. Here's what happened. Here's the impact. Here's the standard. Here's what needs to change. And here's how we repair. And here's how we move forward. There's no trauma. There's no punishment. There's no endless processing. It's adult partnership and leadership. Okay. Safety isn't created by preventing rupture. It's created by knowing what happens after rupture happens. Rupture and disagreement is going to happen in a human relationship. There is no human partnership in the world where there isn't disagreement. If there is a relationship that you're in where you guys never disagree, it means you guys don't talk to each other. It means you guys do not talk to each other. When two people come together and talk to each other, there will be differences of opinion. There will be disagreement. There will be a different perspective. There will be these moments of rupture. How do you repair? There are several other rhythms I talk about throughout the book. Again, I'm not going into all of those here. I'm just giving you a high level view of a lot of the ways that hiring, onboarding, and interviewing goes sideways, right? And so when I talk about relational intelligence, this is one of the anchors that I talk about in my book, This Can't Be Normal. It's not about being soft, and it's not about avoiding accountability or endless empathy. Relational intelligence is the capacity to stay present when trust is strained, hold standards without hardening into a tyrant, repair without rescuing, tolerate disappointment without self-blame, lead humans without turning everything into a verdict, right? When we don't have an anchor of relational intelligence, hiring feels like, it's terrifying. With it, it becomes human again. And so marriage teaches us something that leadership keeps forgetting. Commitment is not about eliminating difficulty. It's about building something that can hold. And that's the beauty of both marriage and hiring teams, comes from a shared becoming, from watching someone grow, from growing alongside them, from creating something that neither of you could have built alone. Hiring is a choice, and leadership is a relationship. And when we stop trying to choose our way out of relational work, we finally get to build the kinds of cultures and lives that create meaning, purpose, and legacy. So I wrote my book, This Can't Be Normal, because I kept meeting leaders who thought that hiring was their greatest failure, when in reality, they were just leading humans inside systems that didn't have anchors and rhythms that created safety. And so this book, again, is not about hiring perfectly. It's about learning how to lead humans without abandoning yourself. Thanks so much for joining me today. And if today's conversation resonated with you, and I know this was a long conversation, I want to invite you to share this. If something spoke to you here and you know of another leader who can resonate from this messaging or it can help them, I would love if you could take a moment to share this conversation. Thanks again. Hey there. If you're the one who notices problems before anyone else does, this is for you. You're the one who sees things first. The tension in the room, the teacher sleeping who just might quit. You're already tracking the consequences. Who will be upset? Who will push back? So even on days that look fine or feel calm, your body doesn't fully stand down. You go to sleep tired and you wake up already bracing. Not because today is chaotic or any day is chaotic, but because something could go wrong. And you know you'll be the one that's holding it. It's the responsibility that can sometimes feel crushing. You stay alert, reliable, and steady because you've seen what happens when things aren't held, when communications slip, when standards soften, when everyone assumes someone else will step in. And because you're so good at holding it, more of it finds its way to you, quietly, gradually, until no one sees how heavy it's become. This is not burnout, and this is not a discipline problem. It's what I call the invisible weight of leadership. If you see yourself in this, or even if your breath changed just a little bit, that's enough. And if you want to keep going and learn more, the opening chapter of my book, This Can't Be Normal, What to Do When Success Starts to Feel Like Survival. My book continues this conversation. You can go ahead and download chapter 1 for free and continue this dialogue. If you are loving the Schools of Excellence podcast and have gotten any value out of it for your school, I would love if you can do 2 things for me. 1, subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode. And 2, can you please leave us a review? Reviews help other school leaders know that this is the place to learn how to build a school of excellence. And I would be so grateful if you can do that for us. Your help and support makes this show to be able to be listened by the thousands of other school leaders all around the world. Thanks so much for listening, for giving us your time and attention each and every week. And I appreciate that you have joined us.